Hi, hello. I have been very sick for like the past week or so. It wasn't the Rona, it was food poisoning. I was betrayed by some stray fried chicken I had, and I vomited nonstop like 15 times in one day, and it like completely wrecked my throat for like a whole week. I was also so dehydrated that I like nearly had to go to urgent care, which would have been terrible because there are so many like Rona cases in there. But finally I was able to like keep some water down after like hours and hours and hours of vomiting, and we're all good now. Now I'm all good. My voice is back. I'm like no longer fatigued and dehydrated and a hot mess. But in light of all of that madness, I haven't been able to like film and edit my like longer form, super talkative videos. And so I just wanted to film like a fun, quick little video discussing the very last sort of book haul, so to speak, I conducted, which is like kind of like a clickbaity title because it's not like I went out and I bought all these books at once. I got all of these different books like throughout the month of December. 3 out of the 10 books that I have in this stack, they were actually gifts from a friend. They were like early birthday gifts. But I just figured, I would take a little bit of time to appreciate some of the really beautiful books that I received as a present and which I bought in the past month. Because I'm one of those people who, when it comes to physical books, I actually care a lot about the aesthetics of the book itself because, and this is just my opinion, I'm not saying that this is like how everybody in the world should be thinking, but I've personally always felt like the essence of a book, like at its core, it's the words. And those words can come at you through multiple different mediums. They can come like physically on a page, they can come on a screen, they can even come via the ear, like through an audiobook. I firmly hold the attitude that books technically need to occupy like zero physical space in your life. So when a book does then occupy physical space in my life, I have very high standards for it. Because for me, a physical book no longer functions just as a book. It's no longer words on a page. It is an art piece. It is an aesthetic, physical object which occupies space in my home, which occupies space on my shelves for display, and which must therefore be beautiful or interesting to look at in some way. All of which is a very long-winded way of me saying that I will not buy books unless I find something physically interesting about them. And if I do own any books that I don't think are like physically pretty or interesting, usually after I'm done reading them, I will declutter them. Because it's like my bookshelf is like right next to my bed, right? Like when I wake up every morning, my bookshelf is one of the first things I see. And what I don't want to see on my shelves is like an eyesore of a book. I take a lot of pleasure and joy in the like aesthetic delight of a physical book, right? I'm one of those people who I pay a lot of attention to how a book is physically constructed, who designed the cover pages, what kind of paper did they use? Are the edges sprayed like this one? Are they cut edges, which are like these smooth ones? Or are they deckled edges like this one here? Like I'm one of those people who I pay a lot of attention to those things when I buy a book. I also really appreciate it when somebody has like taken the time to draw a beautiful like cover, as opposed to just like my least favorite covers are the ones where it's just like a photograph. Thanks for not trying, like. But yeah, so a lot of these books that I bought because they're physically very beautiful, not just because I want to read them. In quite a few of these cases, these are books which I already have read. I just wanted to like own a copy, or in 2 cases, I wanted to own an additional copy because I thought this edition was really stunning. Hi, hello, it is Editing Prachi. Couple of things. One, I am super aware of the fact that my hair looks like bonkers in this video. It looks bonkers right now, but that's just like the stage that my hair growth is like currently in. It just looks horrid unless I heat style it. It looks absolutely unhinged, and if I have to suffer through that, then so do you. Second, I didn't record like a little transitional bit for me to do my intro, so let me take this moment to say, let's get it. First off, let's actually talk about these 2 books that I bought. They are both by the Argentinian author Mariana Enriquez. And so let's talk about Things We Lost in the Fire first. It was initially published as Las Cosas que Perdimos en el Fuego. It was translated from Spanish by Megan McDowell. It's a collection of short stories, a lot of which have a horror element to it. And I read this book earlier this year, and this is not the edition I actually read. I read the American edition. I initially rated the short story collection 4.5 stars, but I could not stop thinking about this. I read this book like way early in the year, like in the first quarter of 2021, and all the way through like November and December, and even now, I still keep thinking about some of the short stories I encountered in this novel. Because to me, I think Mariana Enriquez is a perfect example of how different cultures have different approaches to horror, because different people around the world all have different things that they consider to be scary. And a lot of these things are sort of very, very tightly linked to the time and place, the culture and moment in which we are living, in which we have been raised, in which like our society functions. And so like, for example, one of the really interesting thing about this collection of short stories is a lot of them don't really have a sense of closure. Like something terrible and horrifying happens and we just like don't know how it resolves. There really is no closure there. And I remember that caused in me this sense of like unease and dissatisfaction until I realized that actually like that is how Argentinian society has functioned for a really, really long time. Like during the Argentine dictatorship in the 70s, extreme violence occurred and people would literally just like disappear in the middle of the night, never to be seen or heard from again. And all the family members of those who were disappeared, like they never got their closure. Like yeah, Argentina ended up eventually having like a truth and reconciliation committee, but for a lot of people, like they never found out what happened to their family members. And so it's interesting to kind of see that reflected in the lack of closure when something senselessly violent happens here. Another really interesting way in which like society and politics makes its way into this is the sort of running theme of violence happening out in the open, just like extreme, senseless, seemingly shocking violence, and like nobody acknowledging it or even really reacting. Because that was the real terror of living under the dictatorship, right? It would be like you would wake up one morning and your neighbors would just have been like dragged off in the middle of the night and you couldn't raise a fuss. You couldn't do anything about it because if you did, well, you're next. And because it was happening on such a large and massive scale, all of these sort of like disappearances, deaths, tortures, imprisonments, people just ended up in this sort of state of terrified apathy. And so many of the characters are kind of like that. They witness something horrifyingly violent and senseless, and then they all just kind of like move on with their lives as if it never happened, which is so interesting. And it's such a like interesting reflection of what's going on. Every single story in here, like no matter what its length is so rich. Like I keep reading them over and over again and finding different layers of meaning. Like the titular story, The Things We Lost in the Fire, it's about groups of women who decide that they will like burn themselves in these huge bonfires so that they're horribly disfigured as a form of public protest, because they feel like society has been so violent and so destructive. And then on top of being so violent and destructive, it refuses to acknowledge that it has been violent and destructive. It likes to pretend like nothing has even happened. And so these women, they burn themselves as a way to force society to see. Because you can't ignore the physical disfigurement of the burns these women have all over their bodies. You are forced to acknowledge what's going on. You are forced to see. And it's just like, like every story in here, I just like keep thinking about it. It haunts me. I kept looping back around to the short story collection. Like it would not leave me alone. It lived rent-free inside my brain. It continues to live rent-free inside my brain. And so I gave it 5 stars. And I also bought, I ordered this from Blackwell's. It is the UK edition of the cover because I just think it's so beautiful. I think the artwork is like stunningly pretty and creepy and haunting. And since I bought it, I have like definitely reread some of these stories. And so this is a book that I'm like very, very glad I own because I know I'm going to keep kind of going back and rereading these stories and finding new layers of meaning in them. And because I was so in love with this short story collection, I also bought Mariana Enriquez's second short story collection, The Dangers of Smoking in Bed, also translated by Megan McDowell, and with similar super beautiful, super kind of creepy and unsettling artwork. You can see that this book is actually slightly bigger in size than the other one, and it's a little bit more fancy, like it has French flaps, and that's because this was actually shortlisted for the 2021 International Booker Prize, which is a prize specifically for translated fiction. And I haven't read this yet, but I'm very, very excited to read it, given just how much I love The Things We Lost in the Fire. Man, I'm obsessed with Mariana Enriquez. I could not stop thinking about this book. It is genuinely like one of my faves of 2021. And so I'm very, very happy to own these like beautiful and unsettling editions of her short story collection, because that is how I would describe her writing. Beautiful and unsettling. Mariana Enriquez is a writer, just generally, whose future I will be watching with very close interest. So the next sort of like set of books that I want to discuss together are the Iliad and the Odyssey. So in December, I read The Song of Achilles, and that was another book that I think I initially rated 4.75 stars, and then I like looped back around and rated it 5 stars. The thing to know about me is that I am a like millennial bisexual, which means that by law, I am required to have undergone some sort of mythology phase in my life. You know? If you're a millennial bisexual, you went through that phase too, where you were super into like some form of mythology. Maybe it was Greco-Roman mythology, maybe it was Egyptian mythology, maybe it was Norse mythology, maybe you were woke, third eye wide open, and you were obsessed with like Aztec mythology or like Chinese mythology, some sort of like post-colonial situation. Either way, if you are a non-heterosexual millennial, I know you went through a mythology phase at some point in your life. I went through one. It was the Greek gods for me. My aunt and uncle gave me like a book of like Greek myths when I was like 8 years old. And from then till when I was maybe approximately like 13 or 14, I was hooked. Madeline Miller, like she really is that bitch. Like she did it. She reawoken in me like a passion for Greek mythology like no other. She really convinced me after I finished reading The Song of Achilles to read the goddamn Iliad. The translation that I picked, I believe it is one of the most recent translations of the Iliad that is available. It also has the distinction of being, I believe, the only translation of the Iliad into English that has ever been done by a woman. And of all of the books that I bought, I would argue that this is probably like the plainest looking cover. But to the cover artist who designed this, I see you and I appreciate you, because I do enjoy that you made like the little horse and these letters. Is embossed the word that I'm looking for? They're like raised up, and so is the horse. So I do appreciate those minor details. I think this is like still a very beautiful and striking book, despite it being one of the plainer ones of everything that I got. There's a decent introduction, as well as some maps and some family trees. Anybody who's ever read anything like mythology related, y'all know like family trees are super important, because a lot of the time people are referred to by the name of their father or by like the house, like the family line that they belong to. So it is kind of important to keep track of that, and I'm grateful that it exists. Very excited to dig into the Iliad, which is a sentence that I never thought would be coming out of my mouth. So somebody give Madeline Miller a goddamn award. And then alongside the Iliad, the other book that I got was the Odyssey. And much like the Iliad, this edition of the Odyssey by Homer is also the only translation of the Odyssey into English to ever have been done by a woman. The woman in question is Emily Wilson. I'm actually going to link a video up in the cards, and it's the video that actually made me decide to read this specific edition of the Odyssey, because the thing is, the Odyssey has been translated like a gajillion times over by so many different people, and the most famous translation in the modern era is actually the one by, I believe, Fagles. And the reason why I ended up picking this Emily Wilson translation, this translation done by a woman, and then eventually this Caroline Alexander translation of the Iliad, also done by a woman. The reason why I made that very conscious choice to go for these female-led translations is because of this video I watched by, I believe her channel name is Roshin's Reading. So I'm gonna link that video up in the cards. She wrote an essay, I think for like her master's thesis, on the Emily Wilson translation of the Odyssey. Specifically on like, does it matter that the Odyssey is translated by a woman? What contributions does Emily Wilson and her translation make to the Odyssey and the way that we understand it that previous translations have not been able to give us, because they have not acknowledged, for example, that Odysseus and his family owned slaves, and because the male translators' own misogyny bleeds into the way that they translate Homer's writings. And so Roshin, she basically reads her essay aloud, and it is a beautiful essay. It was very compelling. It raised a bunch of really interesting, super cool points, and it just convinced me immediately, like, this is the edition of the Odyssey to read. This is the edition of the Odyssey that I want to own and have and annotate. It has beautiful deckled edges, beautiful French flaps. The cover is beautifully done. There are these stunning little gold details on these women up at the top. There is a hefty, like 79 page introduction, as well as an additional like 10 to 20 page translator's note right at the start of this. There are also beautiful maps in here as well. And interestingly, the back blurb is by Madeline Miller, the author of The Song of Achilles and Circe. Madeline Miller also co-signs this. Roshin from Roshin's Reading co-signs this. Tons of people have co-signed this translation. And I'm just like super excited to, in 2022, actually dig into these ancient Greek classics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Let's talk about two Jane Austen novels that I bought, which I already own editions of. The first is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This is part of the Chiltern Publishing Chiltern Classics edition. And my God, like, isn't it physically stunning? Like, just look at that. Like, the cover is beautiful. I love the red flowers contrasting with like the black and gold and copper. The book also has gold sprayed edges and a bookmark. And all of the Chiltern classics, I own a couple of them. They have these like really beautiful, thick, glossy pages. Like the Chiltern series, chef's kiss. It is genuinely like one of my favorite things to ever exist. I did read Mansfield Park when I was about like 15 or 16 years old, and for years, it has actually been my least favorite Jane Austen novel. I'm able to recognize that when I was 15 years old, I was reading Jane Austen novels as romances. And like, as an adult who understands now that Jane Austen wasn't just writing romances, she was writing these like biting social commentaries, I'm very, very eager to kind of dive back into this novel from the perspective not of, oh, is Fanny Price, the female protagonist of this novel, is she a heroine I enjoy? Do I like her love story with her cousin? Because yeah, that's right. The person she's in love with, it's her goddamn cousin. I'm like, ugh, ew, 0 out of 10, would not recommend. It was like such a ick factor for me when I was 15 years old because I was literally reading this as a romance. And then on top of that, like Fanny Price is like a super moralistic kind of goody two-shoes meek character. Like, she is the direct opposite of Elizabeth Bennet. There is like zero feist or spirit in Fanny Price from what I remember. From the perspective of somebody looking for a romance, it's like a goody two-shoes in love with her cousin. Like, this was not it. If you instead view this novel as like a commentary on like the rich upper class snobbish elite of the society of Jane Austen's time, like, I think this will be like a much more enjoyable and fun and interesting novel, because I'm sure there is actually like a lot of biting wit and commentary that just kind of went right over my head when I was 15 because I was just focused on like, are the two main characters going to get together? Also, I remember at age 15 thinking that there was something really interesting and kind of sapphic going on between Fanny Price and like Mary Crawford, and then immediately repressing that thought because at 15 I myself was very repressed and refused to acknowledge that I was anything but a heterosexual. So yeah, the Chiltern editions are absolutely stunning and beautiful, but they are like a little bit pricey. They originally retail, I think, for 25 American dollars, and I ended up buying this one for 19. But for me, this is like worth it as an indulgent and beautiful purchase because of just how like stunning it is. Additionally, I bought another Jane Austen novel from the Chiltern Classic series. I bought Persuasion, which is actually like one of my absolute favorite Jane Austen novels. I think Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice are like right up there, constantly vying for the number 1 and number 2 spots. But Persuasion was essentially Austen's last completed novel. It was published posthumously, so after she died. So whereas the question kind of posed by Pride and Prejudice is, can two people who seem like they have nothing in common and who have a terrible first impression of each other ever really fall in love? The question that Persuasion asks is, if love appears to have died, can it be reanimated? Can two people who used to be in love find love with each other again? Persuasion may very well easily have just been called like peer pressure, because what it essentially is about is Anne Elliot, the female protagonist of this novel, she was persuaded out of marrying the man that she used to love, Frederick Wentworth. And now years have passed, they meet again, and the question is, can Anne find the strength within herself to trust her own judgment and do what she thinks is right and not what other people think she should be doing? And so it's just like, it's a great story. I love it. You can tell that this is like Austen later in her life because like her protagonists are older. Their concerns are very different from the concerns of, let's say, Eleanor and Marianne in Sense and Sensibility, or even the Bennets in Pride and Prejudice. You can tell that Austen is a little bit more reflective. She's also evolved as a writer, so her writing is like very, very good in this novel. The letter that Wentworth eventually writes to Anne contains like some of my favorite sort of romantic dialogues in all of Austen. And I genuinely love Persuasion so much. Now this Chiltern edition, as you can see, it's beautiful. It looks almost like an Art Deco piece. It also has stunning sprayed edges. I had to have it. Like, even the spine is just so totally stunning. You know, in my entire book collection, I think there are only 4 novels that I have more than one edition of. I don't mind owning multiple versions of those books because, like I said, I care about the aesthetic beauty and value of books, and I think each and every one of these editions that I own is absolutely stunning in its own way. So the next book that I bought, it looks like a box set, and it looks like 3 different books, but it is one book, I swear. It is 1Q84 by Japanese author Haruki Murakami. And in most of the Western world, it actually is published as one giant, 1,000-page volume. However, in Japan originally, and in this beautiful sort of box set that I got, the novel was split up into multiple volumes so that you wouldn't just have this one giant chunky book to read. Even though they're physically 3 different books, when you open up the second book, volume number 2, it begins at page 391. So you do get the sense that you are reading the same book from start to finish because the page numbers sort of continue. I just think this is such a beautiful presentation. I find the artwork really stunning. I even find the stupid little plastic slipcover that they're in kind of pretty, in that I like how they've kind of spaced out the name of the novel as well as the name of the author on it. And I wanted for years to own this, but for the longest time, you couldn't find this for anything less than the retail price, which was $36. And I found this at a used bookstore for $10.99. And I was like, bitch, let me buy this right the fuck now. And so I did. Do I even have the shelf space for this chonker of a book? Absolutely not. But I bought it anyway because this to me exemplifies everything that I was saying about how much I love beautiful book design. I love how the spines look when they sit together. I love that it creates a shape. It is so evident looking at this box set and at the pages inside and at the artwork and everything that several somebodies probably put a lot of time and energy and thought and care into the presentation of this book. So to the people at Vintage Classics who designed this set, I see you, I appreciate you, I salute you. This is beautiful. Thank you for your service. I am proud to have this on my shelf. This is one of those things which causes me so much joy on a purely physical level. This is not the joy of reading. This is the joy of aesthetic pleasure. So this was one of the last books that I purchased in December for myself. And then I have here this pile of 3 books that one of my lovely, lovely friends got me in mid-December as a very early birthday present. So my birthday just passed, it happened in January, but these books were released on, I think it was December 14th, and my friend pre-ordered them for me and had them delivered because she's basically trying to peer pressure me into reading these novels is what's happening. And so she was like, well, if I buy Prachi, the physical fucking book, she can't say no. And she was right. The 3 novels in question are by a Chinese author who goes by the name Mo Xiang Tongshu. Oh my god, I just realized I am sitting in the darkness. Let me try and turn on a light. Hopefully that's better. But so Mo Xiang Tongshu has 3 novels that she has written in their entirety. They're serialized novels, so she released them literally 1 chapter at a time. And what basically happened is that over the years, a bunch of fans have put in a lot of time and energy and effort to try and translate these novels. And now, finally, a company called Seven Seas Entertainment has decided to pay a smaller subset of those fans to go through and properly translate these novels. They've also commissioned fan artists to design covers and some internal art for these novels as well. So the first novel is The Scum Villain Self-Saving System. This is Mo Xiang Tongshu's earliest novel, and so it is her most sort of primitive. I will say that of the 3 novels, I think the artist for this one, Velinci, might be my absolute favorite. I'm obsessed with this cover. I think green was such a beautiful choice for it. It looks fresh and beautiful. I'm gonna review each of these books in depth, and especially Scum Villain. That review should be coming out very soon because I burned through that shit in December, and I have so many thoughts that need to be exercised somewhere. So here I'm just gonna, I think, talk a little bit about the physicality of the books. I will say that I think Scum Villain has, in my personal opinion, my favorite art. I don't know if it's the best art of the 3 or not, but it's my personal favorite. I really love the sort of beautiful green color scheme that they've chosen for the books. I so thoroughly enjoy every single illustration in this book. I'm obsessed with how Velinci does dappled sunlight. I'm also obsessed with her character drawings and expressions. illustrations. There aren't like a billion illustrations. This is not a graphic novel by any stretch of the imagination. I think there are just like 10 or 11 internal illustrations in each of these novels. The second Mo Xiang Tongshu novel is The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. It has this beautiful like blue color scheme that you can see. As you can hopefully tell, the art style is completely different because the artist is completely different. And I will say that this is a very close second favorite after Scum Villain's Self-Saving System. This art style is like so incredibly detailed. It is bonkers. I genuinely like cannot stop staring at so many of these images because the sheer level of detail involved in each of them is absolutely stunning. Like, hats off to Marina Privalova. And then the last Mo Xiang Tongshu novel that my friend got me, it is, according to all of my friends who watched The Untamed, they've read The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. A couple of them have even read Scum Villain. According to all of them, this is Mo Xiang Tongshu's best work. It is also her most recent work. So Scum Villain was the first thing she ever wrote, then The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, and finally Heaven Official's Blessing. It is also the longest of her works. I believe Scum Villain is 4 volumes. Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation is either 4 or 6 volumes. This is going to be 8 volumes total, which is, it's going to be well over 1,000 pages. I think it's going to be something closer to 2,000 pages total by the time it's all done. Unfortunately, while the cover art of this is stunning, like the cover as well as the interior first set of color illustrations are beautiful, the rest of the artwork is done by a completely different artist, Zelda CW, and it is my least favorite art style of the 3 novels because it's a very distinctive art style. There are also like, there's at least one image which is I think like chibi style, which is super cute, but compared to like the way Velinci does facial expressions, shapes, lighting, characters, and the way that Marina does like incredible, detailed, stunning style traditional art, I just think this is like, it falls short. While I have no doubt that Heaven Official's Blessing is absolutely the best story that Mo Xiang Tongshu wrote, I think in terms of these 3 book series, it received the short end of the stick in terms of artwork and illustration. And for those of you who like don't know who Mo Xiang Tongshu is, you like don't know what these novels are, you are like, bitch, what are you talking about? Because I haven't even given you like a plot summary of these novels, unlike the other ones. When I release my Scum Villain video, probably within the next like week or 2, I kind of want to talk a little bit in general about Mo Xiang Tongshu, the author as a whole, and what I think her like strengths and weaknesses are, so that you can decide if she is an author that you want to actually read. Because not gonna lie, like these books are a heavy time investment. Scum Villain, which is the shortest and most problematic of all of her novels, is still like, the EPUB that I had was still like 1,000 pages long. So I mean, like, even the shortest of her novels is still a chonker. Like, she is writing Dickensian length type novels. And so hopefully that review will give you a sense of like why a bunch of us who read her novels have like stuck it out, why we think those like 1,000 pages are worth it. And you can decide whether you think it's worth it as a time investment for you or not. I had hoped this would be like a short video, but I went on so many different tangents and rants about the aesthetic value of books. I'm so sorry. But as always, if you have made it all the way to the end with me, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an incredible upcoming week, and one day I will remember what the rest of my outro was. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Bye.